The PS5 is definitely great, but where are the next-gen games? For those of us lucky few who have been able to find a PS5, we've had it for a few months now, and for the most part, the console's been great. Games like Demon's Souls, Outriders, and Hitman 3 have all been a ton of fun, and going back into the backlog and playing stuff like Days Gone or Ghost of Tsushima has also been pretty cool because they're getting some sweet upgrades that make them run at 60 frames per second at really high resolutions. But with those few positives out of the way, I think one of the biggest problems facing the PS5 right now is that there just aren't enough next-gen games available for it. Not even just exclusives, just next-gen games in general. Going back to last summer when Sony actually showed off the PS5, they had a ton of games to announce for it, like Horizon Forbidden West, God of War Ragnarok, Spider-Man Miles Morales, and they talked about how they believed in generations, and they all seemed like next-gen games. But as time went on, as the months passed, they started to slowly trickle out news that every single one of those games would also be coming to PS4. And to be clear, because I really like Sony's first-party games, this is not just a knock on Sony. Microsoft is having the exact same problem on the other side of the fence. The difference is they were upfront about it from the very beginning. They said, yeah, for at least the first year of the Xbox Series X being on the market, we're going to be releasing our next-gen games cross-generation. And people got their anger out of the way then. Sony, on the other hand, said straight up at the beginning that they believed in generations and wanted these games to be exclusive to the PS5, and then they just backtracked on it without really saying anything. They didn't really give a reason why. I think the biggest and most obvious reason we're not seeing a lot of next-gen games yet comes down to the pandemic. So last year when everyone had to lock down, we all got those first round of stimulus checks, and a lot of people took that big influx of money and went out and bought a PS4, because if you're locked in the house, you need some games to play, right? You want a PS4 Pro with Ghost of Tsushima to get you through the summer. And on top of that, as we all know, PS5s are still notoriously hard to find, and unfortunately, they're just going to get harder to find because of that ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal for like a week. And this is definitely not the fake scarcity Nintendo creates by holding back a bunch of consoles when they release a new one to drive up the demand and make sure people are going to keep buying them as soon as they're available. This is a real shortage. Like, Sony is delivering as many PS5s as they can, to the point where, like, if you order a digital edition of the PS5 on the Sony Direct store, there's a good chance you're just going to get the disc version instead, because they want to fulfill those orders with the consoles they have at any given time. So when you take all these pandemic side effects and smash them together, a lot of developers like Sony or Capcom are looking at the playing field and saying, well, there's about 5 million PS5s out there right now, but there's 100 million PS4s. And yeah, I know we announced Resident Evil 8 Village for the PS5, but if we tweak it just a little bit, we could probably get it running pretty well on the PS4 Pro. And they're going to release it on the PS4 and PS4 Pro because they'll get way more sales that way, you know? And honestly, I don't think it's the worst option, because we could be dealing with what's happening over in the movie world, where every big movie that was supposed to come out in 2020 is getting delayed into oblivion. Like, that backup is going to be lasting all the way into 2022. And while some games are getting delayed because of COVID and the complications from working from home, it's nowhere near as bad as what we're seeing on the movie side. So I'm glad that the alternative seems to be just dumbing the games down a little bit and releasing them on the last gen console. And you gotta keep in mind that this generation is a lot different than all the other ones that have come before because of the backwards compatibility with the last gen consoles. Like, the PS5 and the Xbox Series X are both really good at running games from the previous generation. And on the Series X, you can go all the way back to the beginning. But back in the day, like between the PS2 and the PS3, that was a huge jump in architecture. Like, the way you had to make games was completely different back then, and that's why with games like Call of Duty 2 on the Xbox 360, it was a completely different game on the regular Xbox. It was just too costly to release the games on both generations, and we gotta be honest, Sony and Microsoft had a lot easier time getting these consoles into people's hands back then. But as someone who spent $500 on a PS5 last November, I'm actually kind of bummed because I don't have a lot to play on it right now. I've basically been living on my PC for the past year playing old games, and that's a really weird feeling. I've never had that experience with a console generation. I've also seen the argument popping up more and more that it's bad that a lot of these PS5 games are also being released on PS4 because they're holding the next generation back. And thankfully, after doing some digging, while it does make sense on the surface to think that way, there's a lot of evidence that that's not the case. A great example is a game I've already mentioned, which is Resident Evil 8 Village. So we all remember when that was announced, they were very clear that it was just a PS5, Xbox Series X and PC game, there would be no ports to the PS4 or Xbox One. And then as time went on, the announcements start to trickle out, and then we see that, yeah, Capcom went back and turned the settings down a little bit with plans to release it on PS4 and Xbox One. And that's a great example of Capcom already working on a next-gen game and then reading the tea leaves and saying, man, there are just so many more last-gen consoles out there still being used that we would be stupid not to just turn down some settings and release it there as well. Horizon Forbidden West is a little different because that game started development back in 2017, so there's no way that was ever planned to be just a PS5 exclusive. I feel like they went into that game as a PS4 game. They saw that the generation was ending and they got the release date for the PS5, so they're actually beefing up the PS4 version for the next gen consoles instead of paring down the PS5 version for PS4. Like, that's a great example of a game that definitely is not being held back because it's also being released on PS4. And on the Sony side of things, we actually have some great evidence that they're not paring back PS5 games because we have stuff like Demon's Souls, Ratchet and Clank, and Returnal. There's a clear evidence path of them looking at these games and saying, man, these games are just so much more advanced and better on PS5 that we're not even going to attempt to bring them to PS4 because it would like damage the integrity of those games. They would be completely different games. So Sony has shown us that they are not afraid to release next-gen exclusive games unless they can run on the PS4 by design. I think that makes sense. The last thing I really want to point out here is that this pandemic situation is creating a bigger problem than just exclusive games. Looking to the near future, I was really excited for stuff like Deathloop, Gotham Knights, and Back 4 Blood, and each of those games was delayed one after the other into either late 2021 or early 2022, and that's just a huge bummer because it shows that working from home, while a lot of people do end up liking it more, it slowed down game development a lot. And I guess it's good that they're delaying these games and taking the time to get them right, but it just sucks that we have to sit here with this huge drought of games on our brand new consoles. I've said this in a few videos now, but if you have a PS4 Slim or a PS4 Pro and that's still working, you might want to stick with that for the time being, because if you want a PS5, unless you're sitting on every bot or website out there, you're probably going to have to end up paying at least $800 to a scalper, but most of the big games are also coming to PS4, and they look like they run pretty well, at least on the PS4 Pro. And then when you do manage to get a PS5 at MSRP, not only will there be a lot of new games to play on it, you'll still own those older games which will run and look better on your PS5, and the launch titles like Demon's Souls or Ratchet and Clank, stuff like that will be a lot cheaper than $70 by then. So to wrap this all up, the pandemic is making it so people who can't find a PS5 are still not going to be able to find one, and also the people who have them are going to have no games to play on them, which is a pretty sucky situation to be in, but thankfully we have the light at the end of the tunnel shining down there, wherever. I don't know how long the tunnel is. It might be like the rest of the year, but it's there. We can see the light. We'll get there eventually. Everyone's going to get vaccinated and times are going to be great. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for you today on the PS5. Make sure you're PS ready by subscribing and setting your notifications to all. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.